Well, there's a domino effect that you have to be aware of whenever you're dealing with all sin. And everything begins with the Bible. Remember, we've already looked at Acts 2:42, where it says the early church continued in the apostles' doctrine. The apostles' doctrine actually accepted all of the moral guidelines of the Old Testament teachings, plus they added what revelation was given to them by the Holy Spirit. In Leviticus 18:23, we're told that a woman shall not lie with a beast, and we're told in chapter 20, verse 13, that a man cannot lie sexually with a man or a woman sexually with a woman, and these are called an abomination by God. The word abomination is used by God for the strongest opposition to something. And then also, if a person is going to violate the Bible with the area of bestiality or homosexuality, he has to deal with another problem, and that is that that's part of God's law that also includes in Exodus 20:13, thou shalt not kill. So if you're going to violate one area of the law, is it okay now to go ahead and start killing people randomly? And then there's another one that says thou shalt not commit adultery. And the woman who was caught in the very act of adultery, she was actually set up by the Pharisees. And when Jesus saw her and she came to him, or was brought to him, he said, where are those that condemn you? And she said, they're not here, Lord. And he said, neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. He was saying that the sin had to be dealt with. In other words, if you have committed adultery, you need to deal with the fact that you committed adultery. And then what about thou shalt not steal? If a person is going to violate one of the other laws of God, why not just go steal whatever you want? Tell your neighbor, look, I wanted that, so I just took it. And what about false witnessing, where we testify either against a person, saying the person did something when he did not, or what if we do not recognize that person's distinction, like anti-Semitism, for example? If a person is a Jew, is he less a person than someone who is not a Jew? So we've got to look at the total picture. It has a tremendous domino effect. As soon as you undercut the apostles' doctrine, then you actually undercut everything else, and you end up making choices based upon what you think is right rather than what God says is right. Jesus saw this problem with marriage when he was speaking, and Matthew records it, and so does Mark, when Jesus said, don't you know that he which made them from the beginning made them male and female, and a man should leave his mother and father and cleave unto his wife? And this is repeated, Matthew 19:14, also in Mark 10 and verse 6. So what we have to look at here is the total picture. The big problem in our lives comes whenever we decide to change what God says we ought to do, and we decide to do what we think we should do. You see, our thoughts are not God's thoughts. Neither are his ways our ways. For as the heaven is higher than the earth, God says in Isaiah 55, so are my thoughts higher than your thoughts. So what someone has suggested is that if we really want to order our lives in accordance with what God teaches us, we need to learn to think God's thoughts after him. And God's thoughts include sexual purity. They include respect for human life. They include the sanctity of marriage. They include respecting property rights. They include not making false or racial or accusatory statements against people who are different from us and with whom we may not agree. So the Bible is very clear that once you undercut the apostles' doctrine in Acts 2:42, then anything goes. You see, God's Bible is like a rule book to baseball, basketball, or football. I've officiated all three, and one thing I never permitted was any team or any player to violate the rules indiscriminately just because he didn't like the rule. Well, God said, look, Acts 2:42, they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine. So what I'm asking you to think about this morning is, what does God want me to do rather than what I want to do?